This is the Speaking of Writers podcast. I'm Steve Richards. The book is Burnout. The author is Joshua Hood. Becoming one of the U.S. Forest Service's elite smoke jumpers has been Jake Slade's dream. Parachuting into the path of a raging fire and beating it into submission isn't a job for the faint of heart. But after 4 years in Folsom, he's ready to prove himself. After surviving the grueling 6-week training course, he thinks he's ready for anything nature has to dish out. But when fighting a wildfire gets Slade involved in a string of murders deep in the mountains of California's notorious Emerald Triangle, Slade finds himself caught between a disgraced DEA agent trying to solve his final case and the ruthless cartel hitman determined to kill them both. What began as a straightforward search and rescue mission swiftly turns into a harrowing run for his life. Joshua Hood joined the Army after graduating with an English degree from the University of Memphis and served as a squad leader with the Parachute Infantry Regiment in Afghanistan, where he was decorated for valor in Operation Furious Pursuit. A former SWAT team member with the Shelby County Sheriff's Department in Memphis, Tennessee. He is a USA Today bestselling author of several books, including Robert Ludlum's Treadstone series. Makes his home in Collierville, Tennessee. Happy to have Joshua Hood join me for the first time here on the Speaking of Writers podcast. Josh, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
So let's start with smoke jumpers. What exactly do smoke jumpers do?
Well, they are obviously, as the name kind of describes, they jump out of aircraft and provide what's called the initial attack on forest fires, which means they jump ahead of the fire into its path, and they work in small squads to break up or divert the fire as best they can. So they're kind of the specialized Swiss Army knife of the wildland forest fire.
Kind of an elite team, right?
Yeah, yeah. Everybody wants to write about elite. You hear that elite this, elite that, and I thought that going in, but I didn't know anything about wildland firefighting going in, and each level has their own kind of elite unit when you consider not many people do it. So it's one of those things where, yes, they're elite. They have a higher skill set than most, but it's such a small community. It's hard to kind of like pick, you know, who is more specialized or I thought of it as like, who's the craziest? Because who wants to, jump out of an airplane and fight fire?
Okay, so this place, California's notorious Emerald Triangle, describe it.
It's kind of in that Humboldt area. There's 3 counties that come together, and the first time I heard about it was on a documentary called Murder Mountain, I believe it was on Netflix. So it's actually so beautiful. Like I spent my grandparents and my dad are from Northern California, so I spent a lot of time kind of up in that area. We never quite went all the way up to the redwood forest, but you have the oceans, you have big, I think Big Sur there. You have the Redwood National Forest, and it's just kind of this place, my understanding, where, after Vietnam era, you had a bunch of kind of hippies go out there, just kind of wanted to be, do their own thing, live with nature. Marijuana became like just a part of the culture. And then as time progressed and, kind of, I guess, the war on drugs, etc., you start to get kind of this more nefarious group of people that coming in, and so it's like one of the highest areas per capita of kidnapping and missing persons, and it's just this small little speck of a place that you just, it looks beautiful, but then you kind of start digging deeper and deeper. The thing that captured me was I kept saying behind the redwood curtain. What happens behind the redwood curtain is lawlessness and stuff. And I was, well, sounds like something I need to write a book about.
So we have the smoke jumpers. We have the Emerald Triangle. You're describing this place. Where did the idea for this story come from?
I wanted to write a smoke jumper book for a long time, just since I first heard of smoke jumpers. There's not a lot of information out there, and it just, coming from having jumped out of airplanes in the military to thinking like, oh, these guys jump out of airplanes to go fight fire. Um, I just was naturally wanted to know a little bit more about them. Never really could figure out how to put it in a book. Originally, I thought that, kind of the fire would be the antagonist. Figured like jumping out of airplanes into fire, what's more exciting? And that's really as far as I got until I kind of pitched the idea to the editors at Blackstone. I'd like to write a smoke jumper book. And they're like, well, what would it be about? And I was like, guys jumping out of airplanes and fighting fire. And they're like, yeah, but then what? And so then I kind of, it was kind of like building an airplane in flight. I had the idea. They loved the idea. They're like, just give me an outline. So kind of just threw some things on paper, and the story evolved from that.
And you needed a murder too in there to really take it to the next level, right?
I did. The purpose of the book was I'd written primarily military thrillers before, and I wanted to try my hand at a different type of hero, a different type of story. Didn't want him to have military background. I thought that fit with being a smoke jumper. You'd have special skills, you'd be strong, you'd be rugged, etc. Um, I never saw myself kind of writing a murder mystery, even though I was a cop for 8 years. And it just kind of happened organically.
This character, Jake Slade, his dream was to become a smoke jumper. What is he like, and how did you create him?
What is he like? I think he is a very empathetic person. Somehow all the books that I write end up the character being kind of a servant at heart, a person who's willing to put themselves into harm's way while maintaining this code. And I like to put them under intense pressure during the story. And Jake Slade just kind of, I guess there's a misconception that authors have it all planned out at the beginning. Maybe there's not, but when people ask, do you write with an outline? Did you know this was going to happen? Did you know that was going to happen? It's usually no. It just kind of, the characters, maybe they're partially reflections of yourself or partly reflections of people that you've admired, but they kind of evolve within the story, at least for me. So there was no preconceived box, or I just knew, how do you make an ex-con a good guy? How do you take because in the thinking inherently, it's like, well, he did something bad. And so you have automatically a book about redemption. But, one of the rules I guess I've learned is that you don't ever want to do anything that takes away from the character's character. And so that was a little interesting. So it kind of evolved. I don't know if that really answered your question.
Yeah, and you mentioned so you don't use an outline, so you're more of a pantser than a plotter.
Well, I was actually thinking about that the other day. I was thinking, I've always had this idea, and I bought the website rights to have this thing called the Writer's Garage. Because the way I learned, one day I was like, I just want to write a book. And I didn't know a lot of things. And there's a lot more information out there now. So you can kind of go to these master classes, whatever, online and learn these different things. When I started, it was kind of trial and error. And I ended up working with a story doctor. They have different words. They're basically an independent editor who kind of will walk you through like how you tell a story. What are the points? And so, yeah, to answer that, I was thinking of the same question the other day. You hear that a lot, pantser versus outliner. And in my mind, you're doing the same thing, except a pantser's doing it the hardest way possible. He's creating an outline, which is his first draft. And it's just a really, really, really long outline. And you hope when you get done, it works well. Versus someone who's able to sit down and create an outline at the beginning, they kind of maybe see some of the pitfalls. I've tried both. But my issue has always been, I always get into trouble anyway within the book. So I kind of feel that you lose a little mojo putting down all these ideas in an outline versus, just kind of letting it go.
Now, Josh, do you always know the ending when you start?
Mm-mm. I wish I did. I met Clive Cussler, and he said that was the first thing he did was write the ending. And I was like, well, I usually don't even know the ending until I'm getting there. Like, I need to wrap this up soon. What's going to happen?
And you mentioned one day you decided to try your hand at writing a book. So Did you ever want to become a writer, or it was just
Yeah,
that one day?
no, I mean, I grew up always wanting to be an author. But my mom, I've told this story a million times. She used to tell me, the only writers who make any money are those who write ransom notes. So it
Hmm.
was the idea of like you have to have a real job uh, to become an author. And in many ways, she was right. I've been a full-time author now for 7 years or whatever, but there's something about doing it as a job that kind of takes the joy out of it, maybe. It's just like I don't know, maybe it seems to me that whatever anybody does, you could be a brain surgeon, a jet pilot or whatever, you talk to them 10, 20 years after starting it and they're like, yeah, it's just a job. Just fly this jet around, just cutting the brains, but at the very beginning it was, it's kind of all shiny.
Does writing energize you or exhaust you?
It exhausts me. Thinking about writing is fun. But getting past that resistance, I've learned that most writers, they have different names for it, writer's block or lack of inspiration. But at the end of the day, it's all procrastination. And it seems that that's something we all share. It's just, man, do I really have to do this again? It's fun when you get into it, but at least for me, it's like going for a run. Like who likes to go for a run?
So is the toughest part getting your butt in the chair and doing it?
No, no, because I've wasted many, many hours sitting in this chair and just staring off into nothing. For me, I can't speak for everybody, but for me, there's a certain sense of fear. And I've just recently kind of realized this. If you ever just happen to look at your computer when just a blank screen, there's nothing on it, um, you see your reflection. And in a way, like sitting in front of that computer is like sitting in front of a mirror. And I can't speak for other authors, but we all fear rejection, or we all fear, uh, some might have imposter syndrome. I think what happens for me personally is that the more you learn about something, um, the more boxes, out, the more of a it's like I have a 7-year-old and a 3-year-old. When I watch them play, there are no rules. There's like, oh, this block is a jet, and this, whatever is my horse, and their imagination's so free. They're just telling it doesn't matter. You could sit there and be like, well, gravity, you can't fly that because it doesn't have wings, or that's not really a horse. It's a piece of Play-Doh. But they see it so vividly. But when you begin to tell them like, or they begin to learn things like my son used to believe in magic, and now I tell them like the wind is magic or whatever. Now he's like, well, Dad, the wind is actually this. Now that he's in second grade, knows everything.
Hmm.
And I think it's kind of like that for me a little bit. The more you learn about what you should do and shouldn't do, the more you learn about like what's selling and what's not selling. You For me, I felt that I've slowly, dug myself into this hole, and you forget like you're looking at the dirt and you're like, how'd I get here? Why am I digging again? And that type of thing.
Hmm. What genres do you especially enjoy reading, and which do you tend to avoid?
I tend to avoid the genre that I write in. Um, Typically, like uh, Mark Graney's a good friend of mine. I can still read his books and learn every time and not see the ending, but the genres become, in many ways, so repetitive that it's like watching a TV show and you already know the ending because you've kind of seen it in another form. Uh, so I love nonfiction. I just finished a book called Operation Nemo about submarines in World War II. It was basically the real story behind that movie U-571.
Hmm.
I like to read books where I learn something.
What books might we be surprised to find on your nightstand?
Hmm. The Bible, probably, because I cuss too much.
Hmm.
But I don't know. That's a good question. I have a pretty wide, my dad would always make me growing up read two classics for every Tom Clancy book or every Dale Brown. So one of my favorite books is, The Razor's Edge by Somerset Maugham. And a lot of people, I don't even know if you say his last name like that. A lot of people think that's like he read that, but read Steinbeck growing up, you know, pretty much all the classics. And so I don't know. I don't know. My wife's always like, she's not even surprised about things that I'm reading anymore.
And are you working on another novel right now? Can you give us a sneak peek into what it's about?
Uh, I am working on something, but I'm working with someone else. So I'm not allowed to talk about it yet. But right now I'm just kind of I made the decision this year after turning into burnout, maybe for the foreseeable future, I'd like to write for myself. There's a lot of stories that I haven't been able to tell because, maybe publishers won't publish them or, sales aren't whatever. So I'd like to spend a little time getting back to what got me here and writing these stories that I like to write and whatever genre I want to write them in and just maybe Amazon publish them or whatever. Just, I don't know. I think that done myself a disservice just saying he only writes thrillers or
Mhm.
military thrillers.
I wanted to ask you, how did you get involved with the Ludlum and Treadstone series?
It was a happy accident. Mark Graney and I, we went to Bouchercon. It was like 7 years ago, I think, 6 years ago. And while I was there, I met Tom Colgan, his editor, who is kind of like the master of these, what they call estate books. He works at Penguin, and they do a great deal. They've done the Clancy's, Ludlums, etc. uh, I was just there to meet him, didn't think anything about it. And he had read one of my earlier books. I just finished ghostwriting 2 books, and he had read one of them and didn't think anything of it. And then I got a call from Mark when I got home, and he said, "Hey, if you're about to start a project, because I was about to start another book, um, maybe just hold off on that." And it was pretty, kind of like, okay, what? He's like, "I can't tell you, but it'll be worth it." And then a couple days later, I got a call from Tom Colgan asking if I'd be interested in trying out for the Ludlum estate. And I thought he'd called the wrong person. I was like, "Are you serious?" And he said, "Yes." Like, "Josh Hood, you want me to write that?" And he said, "Yes, we'd like you to try it." And so I came up with a little short outline synopsis and then 50 pages and submitted it, and they liked it. And so I got the gig.
Hmm. He is Joshua Hood. The book out now is Burnout. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you.
And this is the Speaking of Writers podcast.